Next Sunday, you'll be holding a special meeting to consider calling me as First Unitarian Universalist's settled minister. The vote goes as I hope it will. I'll be the 8th person in the congregation's history to hold that role. So this morning and next, I want to spend a little of our time together reflecting on our shared vision. Today we do so as part of this year's major sermon series, Future Visions, Future Selves. Through it, we're inviting you to engage in an imaginative explorations of the future. This spring, we'll be seeing if we can envision something of our planetary future, our human future. We'll explore topics like artificial intelligence and religion, extraterrestrials, and we'll continue to grasp with what it means to live during a time of existential climate crisis. Before that, we'll be tending to that inescapable subject, death. It's long been a central concern of us humans. How do you understand death? What kind of legacy do you want to leave? How do we honor those who have gone before? But prior to turning to questions like those, we are spending this month and next on an aspect of the future that is troubling just about everyone right now. How do we envision the future of our society? It is, after all, election season. We're living through a time when we've been invited by the various presidential candidates to imagine what our lives would be like if they get elected. And it's unfortunately my contention that no matter who gets elected, we're in for some hard times. One of the candidates has been described by his running mate as America's Hitler. A major military leader has come out, who worked with him closely, has come out to describe him as fascist to the core. He's planning to deport more than 10 million people. Many of his allies hope that Project 2025 will be a blueprint for his administration. If he is elected, we can expect an assault on women's rights, LGBTQ rights, workers' rights, well, really any kind of anybody's rights, like we haven't seen since the days of Jim Crow. Hard times. The other major political party candidate is not demanding stridently a ceasefire in the Middle East. I'm skeptical about her ability, if elected, to pass the kind of legislation necessary to address the existential climate catastrophe. Nor do I anticipate that her policies will prove adequate to confront the housing crisis, rising inequality, or the resurgence of white supremacy. She almost always frames her remarks in terms of the needs of the middle class. She talks about how building up the middle class will be the defining goal. She rarely mentions the working classes. She has little to say about the poor. I've yet to hear her lifting up eliminating poverty as a goal. Help to buy houses is all fine and well, but you need a certain level of economic stability to aspire to it. So what about everybody else? No matter who wins, it's hard to imagine that the United States will stop selling arms to Israel or any other country that engages in acts of aggression. No matter who wins, poverty will persist. No matter who wins, rising oceans, warming summers, and fiercer storms. Last week I said that my sermon was one long plea to get out and vote. And I challenged First Unitarian Universalists to reach the goal of 100% voter participation. Can we get another amen to that, please? Amen. But this week, I'm going to take a different tack. And it might be a bit risky because what I have to say is this. Voting is not going to save us. It is not enough. It is never enough. Now again, please go vote. That is not a plea for voter apathy. If you have a question about the importance of voting, consider the apocryphal quote wrongly attributed to Emma Goldman. It runs, "If voting ever changed anything, they would outlaw it." Well, here in Texas, and over there in Florida, and all throughout the South, and pretty much anywhere where Richard Nixon's party of the Southern Strategy has sunk its roots, we know that voting can change things because they've been trying to outlaw it, or at the very least, make it hard for working class and poor people to exercise their right to vote. So go vote. Can I get another amen to that? Amen. The misinformation being spread is pervasive. I even fell for a little bit of it last week. In the first service, I made the mistake of directing people to a State of Texas website that contains misleading voter registration information. Fortunately, between the services, a couple of members of the congregation pointed out my mistake, and I had better information in the second sermon. To me, the whole episode was a reminder of the power of religious community. We can only get free together. None of us can do it alone on our own. We need each other to survive, to thrive. So today, and most Sundays between now and the election, I'm going to tell you this. One of the best sources for nonpartisan voter information is our own voting justice team. They sorted through the morass of material floating around out there, and they can give you good, solid advice. They're committed to get 100% of the members of our congregation to the polls. So if you have a question about the election, where to vote, how to vote, when to vote, please go ask one of the good folks in Channing Hall. Or during the week, or if you're viewing online, you can call our administrative office, and they can connect you with someone who can help you develop a voting plan and get to the polls. And they can also empower you to be part of our Get Out the Vote effort. Our members are block walking, they're making phone calls. We are going to bring, as the phrase goes, souls to the polls. Polls to the souls. Now, having said all that, I'm going to repeat myself. Voting is not going to save us. It is not enough. It is never enough. Can I risk an amen for that? We are on the cusp of what gets called sometimes a kairos moment. The word is Greek. It means the right time. David Graeber and David Wengrow, who we spent time with last month, describe it as one of those moments when frames of reference undergo a shift, metamorphosis of the fundamental principles and symbols is underway, and change is possible. Our Kairos moment is being brought on primarily by the climate catastrophe. How we as a human species respond to it will determine our human future. It is, as the activist and journalist Naomi Klein says, something that changes everything. There's a chance, as she and many other activists hope, that it can be a catalyzing force for positive change. And then there is a chance that it will lead to a dystopian future. The activist Adrienne Maree Brown has noted that the Buddhist philosopher Joanna Macy speaks of this as a time of great turning, a collective awakening and shifting direction away from wanton destruction of this planet and towards abundance and life. The image is really lovely. The question, though, really, is that the way we're going to turn? Brown, Macy, Graeber, when Grow, and lots of other folks hope that we are turning towards abundance and life. But the world is on a knife's edge, and it seems quite possible that we could be turning the other way. Hard times. So the question I see us collectively wrestling with during these hard times, during this difficult epoch, is simply what is the role of our religious community in turning the wheel towards life and abundance and away from scarcity and death? We've done much to try to answer this question already. We've dedicated ourselves to widening love's circle. Our Unitarian Universalist Association claims love is the power that holds us together and is the center of our shared values. For generations, the world's great spiritual activists have been telling us that we need to learn to place love at the center of our lives and our communities. When, decades ago, Martin Luther King Jr. stated that our society must undergo a radical revolution of values, that is what he was talking about. When today, someone like Adrienne Maree Brown writes that placing love is the central spiritual practice of organizers and spiritual leaders, that is what she is talking about. Love is the power that holds us together. We are committed to widening love's circle. Can I get an amen to that? Amen. Those are pleasant words. I want to suggest that living into them requires both personal and congregational transformation. We are not there yet. We are aspiring. We need, I need, you need, to change if we want to fully live into such visions. Two orienting insights as we consider what it means to live into this vision, to put it into action. The first comes from the Chinese-American philosopher Grace Lee Boggs, whose name I suspect might ring familiar to you. She's been with us in the past. She was part of last year's Lives of the Spirit series. One of the great spiritual activists of the last decades, she mentored generations of activists, including Adrienne Maree Brown, from her home in Detroit. Like King, she believed that our human future depended on undergoing a revolution in values. But she did not necessarily think that such a revolution was coming. The mass movements of the mid-20th century, the civil rights movement, the labor rights movement, are not coming back. Instead, the only hope we humans have, she believed, was in small-scale projects that could network together, and doing so, sow the seeds of a different world. It is through networking together, she understood, that we might have the chance to revive something of humanity as we collectively struggle with the intertwined threats of the climate crisis, rising white supremacy, and growing inequality. Holding this vision in her heart, she taught, building community is to the collective as spiritual practice is to the individual. Building community is to the collective as spiritual practice is to the individual. If we are going to provoke the great turning, we have to transform both ourselves and our communities. Our next orienting insight comes from the 19th century Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky. A political radical, he spent considerable time in prison and in exile. He once had to endure a mock execution by firing squad. His last novel, The Brothers Karamazov, is one of the greatest works of literature ever written. And in it we find the observation, love in action is a harsh and dreadful thing compared to love in dreams. Love in action is a harsh and dreadful thing. Building community is to the collective as spiritual practice is to the individual. Widening the love circle. The work ahead, if we are truly committed to these things, is profoundly challenging. Taking love as a guiding principle in life places us at odds with the powers and principalities of our day. Here in Texas, we seem to be caught in the politics of cruelty. Widening love's circle means creating a politics of compassion. This we can start with small actions. It can mean offering kindness and empathy when we find ourselves living through hard times. One of the most powerful stories I know about this comes from the Holocaust survivor, Greta Weissman-Klein. Writing of her time in Auschwitz, Klein recollects, Ilse, a childhood friend of mine, once found a raspberry in the camp and carried it in her pocket all day to present to me that night in a leaf. Imagine a world in which your entire possession is a raspberry and you give it to your friend. No matter how rough and rocky, no matter the road we trod, we are always haunted by the politics of compassion. That's what Adrienne Maree Brown is talking about when she says we need to practice the world we wish to see. I wish the Israeli government, with its world-class military, would wake up to this reality. I wish that all of the violent actors, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranian government in the Middle East and elsewhere, would open themselves to this truth. I wish President Biden, Vice President Harris, and whomever is the next president of the United States would come under its sway. The politics of compassion. Sometimes I like to say that our purpose as a religious community is to undergo what I call the resurrection of the living. My inspiration here comes from the Gnostic Christian text, the Treatise on the Resurrection. In it, we find an answer to the query, what is the resurrection? It is truth standing firm. It is a revelation of what is and the transformation of things, a transformation into freshness. The resurrection of the living contains the realization that amongst the essential building blocks of a politics of compassion are the small daily actions we each take. We can only effect a great turning if we come to understand that giving a raspberry to a friend is a core part of our politics. So let me ask you this. How do you need to change in order to do that? I know that I am always in process. I am already not there. I'm constantly trying to shift, try to change myself. When I make a mistake, like I did last week, I attempt to assume that efforts to correct me are coming from a commitment to widen love's circle, not to play the game of get the minister. And I'll have to admit that making that shift has been difficult for me. Get the minister, after all, is a favorite game of many Unitarian Universalist congregations. And it's no secret that the majority of First Unitarian Universalists, settled senior ministers, have had what we now call negotiated resignations. The congregation's very first minister, John Petrie, was forced out by the board. Horace Westwood, his immediate successor as a settled minister, had the same fate. I know that if my settled ministry with you is going to be successful, I need to assume that suggestions to help me grow are coming from a desire to widen love's circle. But it is going to be equally important for the members of this congregation to figure out what you need to do to change to avoid playing get the minister. That, however, is not a subject for a sermon. That is something you have to figure out for yourselves. And I say this, and that is not to say that some of your previous ministers did not make mistakes. My immediate predecessor resigned his fellowship pending an investigation for misconduct. Clearly, a negotiated resignation in the case of misconduct is warranted. But was that really the case for 4 other ministers in the last 75 years? Again, that is the congregation's question and not mine. And it might be that we've done all of the work together that we need to do to make sure that such a pattern does not reassert itself. It could be that there is more work to do, though. Love in action is a harsh and dreadful thing compared to love in dreams. And I suspect that both personal and congregational transformation are necessary to truly widen love's circle and live into our mission together. And I hope that we do, because when there is a healthy relationship between the clergy of this congregation and its members, First Unitarian Universalists can do great things. You might know some of the history. This was the first historically white congregation in the city to legally desegregate. The first non-LGBTQ congregation to have an openly gay senior minister, and a national leader in the sanctuary movement in the 1980s. Love in action is a harsh and dreadful thing compared to love in dreams. None of that was possible without the hard work of personal transformation. Imagine living in 1954 in the Jim Crow South and undergoing enough personal transformation to set aside your racial prejudices to say that this congregation would not turn away people of color. Imagine living in 1982 at a time when homosexuality was profoundly stigmatized by the state's leadership and dominant religious traditions, and saying that you were willing to be ministered to by an openly gay man. Imagine in the mid-'80s saying that you were willing to risk arrest and possibly the continued existence of the congregation over a commitment to offering a loving welcome to the stranger and the refugee. In 2024, truly widening love's circle will require personal transformation. And it is not for me in this sermon or in this moment to speculate on exactly what your personal transformations will look like. That is your work. But one of the reasons why I love First Unitarian Universalist is longtime members often tell me about how the congregation has empowered them to undergo personal transformations. Talked about how the congregation has helped them to move past prejudice, to become less angry and more loving, to share the resurrection of the living and wake up to the beauty of the world as it is. And it is an honor to be with you on such journeys of personal transformation. When we undergo them together, we start to turn this congregation into an even more significant spiritual and civic institution than it already is. We start to move past the work of voter turnout and towards the work of creating a better way. Just this past week, First Unitarian Universalist made strides in doing this. We held a press conference with allied organizations to be as part of our Vidas Robadas installation. Our press conference was covered by Univision. You can watch it online. We also convinced TMO, one of the city's most significant networks of congregations, to come out against the HISD school bonds. They'll be holding a press conference here on Thursday. I hope you can make it. We are building our congregation together into a prophetic voice for widening love's circle in Houston and beyond. Building community is to the collective as spiritual practice is to the individual. Voting is not going to save us, but community, a community that demands us take up the difficult task of personal transformation, well, that might just enable us to survive and even thrive. The politics of compassion, love, and action, that harsh and dreadful thing, We Unitarian Universalists and we, the members and friends of this congregation, are the inheritors of a beautiful tradition that invites us to place love at the center of our lives. Doing so allowed our religious ancestors to do much to bring about a revolution in values, and we are charged to take their vision even further. That together we might bring that vision of widening love circle into being, I invite the congregation to say, Amen.